everybody, it's me, Grace Wasserstein. I'm here with
Yassi.
And we decided that instead of doing just me talking about several books, we wanted to talk about a book that we are very fond of. It's The Mercies,
Which we read together.
Yes.
Well, we don't ever read the same books at the same time, so this is kind of like a treat.
This is a rare instance where you read a book before I did, and
It's
recommended
true.
it highly to me.
I've actually done it twice this month so far.
Yes.
So,
This
yay.
was originally a book for our book club that didn't end up meeting because
Yay, COVID.
I don't know if you guys know, but nobody's supposed to be meeting in groups. Please don't meet in groups. Please don't.
Please don't give us anxiety.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please stay at home.
So we're bringing the book club to you, sort of. We're just going to be discussing it together a little. Yeah.
This book is available as an audiobook. You can get it through the library app Overdrive or Libby. You can also download Libro FM, and the proceeds go to local independent bookstores. Our favorite local independent bookstore is
Mysterious Galaxy.
You can also order online through Mysterious Galaxy and have books delivered, or you can go through your favorite independent bookstore in your hometown if they're delivering, or you can go on to bn.com. Again, we don't recommend using the other website because they are still delaying the shipment of books, so you might order it today and not see it for another month and a half. So if you're going to order it, please think about independent or Barnes & Noble first.
Indeed. So, shall we get started?
Yes, did you want to give a brief summary of the book, Cassie?
Sure. That's fine. That's a thing I can do in very concise words. So the book is about, basically in the context of the witch trials in Norway in the 1600s. And it is about two women, two different POVs, who are involved within this plot, but really the book is not about the witch trials itself. It's much more about the small town, all the people in it, and what leads like a small community to get to such a place. That's all I'm going to say about it. I think if I say anything else, it's going to be kind of spoilery.
I will spoil the first chapter. The part of the premise of the novel is that this town, Vardo, has no men in it. A storm happens while all the men are fishing, and over the course of a few seconds, all of the boats are upended into the ocean, and none of the men survive. So at the beginning of the book, there are virtually no men in this town. It's pretty much all women. So I think that gives a little bit of context.
You know what? That is fair, and it made the book interesting to me. And one of the reasons I probably would never have picked this book up on my own if I had not at least read that part of it. So that's a fair addition to it. So yeah.
So now to have a brief summary, we've got 3 questions that we are going to answer.
Questions.
And Yassi, I want you to start because I'm reading the questions.
Okay.
So question number 1, what did you like specifically about this novel?
I have to say that my favorite thing about this book is, and this is coming from someone who writes for a living. I love the craft of writing in it. It is beautifully written. It's got very poetic prose. But at the same time, even though that is true, the mastery of the plot, the characters, and just the tightness of sentences and paragraphs, the dialogue, really, really, really well written. The heart that has been put into every character, every sentence, every word, I can feel it. It is a well-loved story, and I think that was my favorite part of it. Like I said before, it's not my usual read. I don't tend to do historical fiction, mostly because usually they are not good, but or at least they're not up to my, not good for me anyway, is what I want to say. They're not written to the level that I want them, so I really like how immediate it felt. It felt relatable to, even though it was historical fiction, it felt like I knew these people, and I think that's because of the craft. So
yeah.
What about you?
For me, I think the conceit of having a town with no men. So instead what you get, there is a male character who shows up who is very integral to the plot and who sort of starts a lot of the events in a lot of the events in motion. But for the most part, this is a book about women, and I don't feel like I've gotten a whole lot of books that really have both well-developed three-dimensional female characters that also have a lot of interactions with other multi-dimensional, interesting female characters. So the result is that you get a lot of different kinds of women, all of whom are very unique and very realistic. These are all women that I feel like I know and I feel like I would be friends with. Some of them I don't think I'd be friends with, but just the diverse cast of these complex women whose lives, even when they are making choices that you don't necessarily think are good choices, you understand where these choices are coming from. And it's been a long time since I've read a book that really had that level of unique women voices, I think.
So I know this is not part of our questions, but I've already wanted to ask you a thing that I've forgotten to actually ask you off camera. How did you feel about the small town feel of it?
Oh.
As a person who has lived in a small town.
Yeah, so obviously this is a much smaller, this is a community of not very many people, like a few,
maybe like
a few dozen or so, less than...
No, more than that, because there was 40 men who died.
Okay.
So it's about maybe less than 100 people total.
Yeah, and then even less now that the men are all gone, and I think... So this is obviously like a much smaller town than I grew up in, but that sort of everybody knowing your business and everybody knowing whether or not you've gone to church, all of that is very familiar to me personally. And I think that made it good, is because I was like, this is realistic to me. This really is how small towns turn on each other. Events happen and then blame gets put on,
one person,
one or two people or a group of people,
right.
And those people are usually the other, and then it becomes a community divided. And so that did feel very familiar to me.
Cool. Yeah.
So next question. So we've got the two main characters. You've got Ursula, who's sort of from a bigger town and comes from comfort, if not wealth, at least comfort. And then you have Marin, who's grown up on this very small fishing village. Who's really only ever known a very simple life.
Right.
So, would you say that you identify more with Ursula or Marin, and why?
It's such a hard question for me, because the person I think I feel most... the person I relate to the most is probably actually Miran's sister-in-law.
That's funny. I thought you were going to say Kirsten, but okay.
I do like Kirsten, and I think part of it comes back to the fact that this is still, while racial issues are brought up and are definitely part of the integral plot, there's not a whole lot of POC women in the story, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's not that kind of story, but it's hard for me to relate entirely with one or the other character. There's definitely parts of me that I think I'm more a person who is like Ursa. I definitely come from a city. That kind of comfort is known to me. My privileges come from that sort of social comfort, I guess, social status. And there are things about Ursa in particular that I was reading that I did not realize all of these things about not being able to bake bread, or like all these little things that she can't do. She can't sweep, can't keep her own home because no one has taught her how to do it. Now, I'm not saying that I'm used to maids or anything like that, but having said that, there are things that when you move out, especially, and you become an adult, like you're like, yeah, this is not a thing I expected to be knowing how to do. Jump a car, I don't know how to do that. Well, now I do, but I did not know how to do that first when I started. So like, there are a lot of things from Ursa's perspective, but at the same time, Miran's POV is a lot closer to me emotionally, and I think it's maybe because I don't actually know why that is. Maybe it's because I just relate to her on a more emotional level. She's struggling with something. She's struggling with understanding how her own society works and how to kind of her role in it, where I think Ursa knows she's an outsider, but Mirren is trying to figure out how to, like, where she is on this, where does she belong, if she belongs anywhere. So I kind of can see it from both directions. What about you?
I think realistically, I'm probably Ursa. Probably Ursa is who I relate to the most. I think that Ursa's got a lot of learning that she has to do. She's sort of
privilege in particular.
Yeah. Of not really understanding the world at large, and particularly not understanding actions having consequences. I think that it's something that, you know, this is going to shock every single person watching this, but I'm white, and so I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up, you know, going to church and from a, you know, fairly, like, you know, we're comfortable family, you know, comfortably middle class family. None of that is a bad thing. It's just all, there's a lot of stuff that as I got older, I became aware of that I wasn't aware of. And particularly what I became aware of is that people, given opportunity, could use what I was given, you know, privilege and opportunity. They could use that as a weapon, instead of as a hand to help up. They could use it as a hand to hurt. And that was very upsetting to me. And there's moments when Ursula sort of begins to understand that the people that she thought that she could trust, or that she thought that she knew, are capable of horrors that she was not expecting. And I think that hit with me. However, I do also sort of understand Merrin, who is on the inside and this is her community and her people, and she does sort of know what can and might happen, but she does feel also a part of that. Like, she feels both in the community and separate from a lot of the community, and not really sure where to put her feet so that she is safe.
Right.
That also rung a bell with me. So I think mostly Ursula, but I also think what's so good about this is that you can find parts of yourself in both of these characters.
Yeah, I love that. I think they both are realistic in different ways. They don't ever... What I love about the craft in this case is that they read definitely like different POVs. I never confuse Ursa's perspective with Mirren's, because just their class privilege is different. Their way of understanding the world is different from each other. So yeah.
So for the last question, how does the world of the Mercies mirror the world of today?
You know, I'm gonna delve a little deep into what I've been doing outside of just the Mercies for a second here, because I've been reading a lot of nonfiction, and I'm reading a book called How We Get Free. I cannot remember the author's name at the moment, but it's a book about Black feminism and how it basically is how the theory is justice can only be served if we serve we see the most disenfranchised people, which is usually women of color, specifically Black people in America, Black women in America. And if we help them, then we help everybody else. It's interesting that I actually read these right back to each other. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's a lot of that, so maybe my mind is kind of, you know, in that direction. But I feel like that is the kind of thing that we need to be talking about today, is how we unlearn a lot of the stuff that we've been told as a society and how we keep growing, particularly on not just racism, but just the status quo in general, just how the world works in general. So yeah, it's a book about justice to me, and about personal justice, not just some overarching big thing, but how we start with our own, like as you said with Ursa. Sure. You start with your own and figure out where you stand in society, and then at that point, what are you going to do about it? Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And what do you think?
Okay, so now I'm going to get political on Maine, and I'm sorry.
As if I just didn't?
Sorry, not sorry. To me, this book is about what happens when men think that they speak for God, specifically about how it's very easy for men in power to see any sort of voice of dissent as devilish, or specifically a threat to their power and therefore a threat to God. Not that I'm saying that any particular person or persons in government think that they speak for God or possibly are God, but I am also saying that that is what's happening. I think that this book is sort of it's
timely.
It's very timely because I think that one of the major themes of the book is sort of about how a community can turn on each other, but how the power to do that, the power to turn on each other, doesn't come necessarily just solely from within the community. It might be that there's the kindling of that, the beginnings of what will eventually become a flame of dissent in the community. Certainly the community piles on, but how easily an outside male force can spark the whole thing ablaze. Because it's very clear, and I don't want to spoil anything here, but it's the community's response to what happens in the book is very varied, but at the same time, there is a moment of sort of clear understanding of the community of what they've actually done. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Where the realization of what they've allowed to happen at the hands of these men in charge. And so I think that it's very necessary right now, because one of the lessons I think that comes out of it is that communities, especially communities of women, are better served when we stand together and when we support each other, because when we choose to other certain women or alienate certain women, the result is catastrophic, not just for those women that we alienate, but also for our community at large.
Yeah, I would say this is a very feminist book. I
don't think there's any way around it. Yeah, it's definitely a feminist novel.
It really is hard to read this as not a feminist piece of work. And I think that's kind of what I love about it, is that it's very, not belligerent, but what's the word I'm looking for here? It's kind of in your face about it a little bit.
And yet at the same time, it is,
it's subtly done, but like...
It is quite, it is not gory with the details, I will say that. This book is not really interested in the witch trials as a whole. It is very much, as you said earlier, interested in
the personal.
Yes.
Like the context of the witch trials is this particular person who was part of the village sort of deal, or people, I guess.
Yes.
Rather than like
yes,
witch trials in Norway in particular. There is the backdrop of that, certainly, but and what I will say one last thing about this. What I particularly like about this is that not only is it a feminist book, but it's also it's to do with race as well, because we also see the witch trials were not, obviously we are, at this age we understand that, the witch trials were kind of a dumb thing, we know this. Yet it was not about just race, but it was, women, but it was also about gosh, I cannot remember their name. The Sami people.
Yeah.
And how that was a thing that kind of... the author talks about it a little bit in the author's notes, where it kind of went under the radar for a long time, and people didn't really think about it as a race issue. But...
the Sami being the indigenous people of Norway.
So yeah, I think that I like the intersectionalism of it. In particular, that it was not just one thing, but this is a problem not on just one facet, but every facet.
Yeah.
So,
and although this is a book about women, the author does make sure to note that a large number of the people tried and convicted of witches during the Norwegian witch trials were actually Sami men. Which I think, especially as Americans, like the vast majority of our witch trials targeted women. Right. But we forget that, like, the witch trials in America were focused mostly on other white people, whereas the witch trials in Norway were almost exclusively centered on the indigenous people there.
And having said that, that's very much true, but this particular village, Vardø, was the first time really in the witch trials where women were centered, and that's why it's an interesting point in history.
Certainly.
So yeah.
All right. thank you so much for listening to us talk about this fantastic book. Once again, it is The Mercies. Be sure to check it out. Let us know what you think about it.
Yeah, hit us up. We definitely love talking about books, and come scream at us about it. So.
Yes, please come scream with us about any book, not just this book. And if there's a book you want us to scream about, let us know.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.